Hey, welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, the place where we try to really unpack the stories behind things, maybe things we think we know pretty well. And today we're doing a deep dive into, well, honestly, one of the biggest names in medical history, Louis Pasteur.
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at the story behind his famous rabies cure. It's more complicated than you might think.
It really is. Our mission today, essentially, is to sift through the history, the original research, even some notes that were, deliberately hidden for decades.
Hidden? Wow.
Yeah. To try and get the full picture, how this rabies treatment actually came about. It definitely challenges some of the standard beliefs.
Okay, and we've got material from a really in-depth new look at this, right? Stuff that digs into details most people just haven't heard.
Exactly. It sheds a whole new light on, the very beginnings of modern vaccine science.
Fascinating. Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this. So before Louis Pasteur was, Pasteur, the medical icon, the guy synonymous with fighting disease, he was actually this giant in industry.
Oh, absolutely. A titan.
I mean, you can make a really strong argument that he might have been the greatest industrial chemist in all of history.
It's not an exaggeration. Think about his work for distillers, brewers, winemakers, the dairy industry.
Huge impact, right?
Massive. The protocols he developed, they reckon it directly led to literally trillions of dollars in increased productivity. Trillions.
That's almost unbelievable. And wasn't there something with silk, too?
Yes. He basically saved France's silk industry. That alone transformed global silk production.
Yeah.
His early career was just hit after hit of these incredibly practical, economically huge breakthroughs.
Okay, so he's already this massive figure, but then things started to shift a bit.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. After the silk industry success, which was huge by the late 1870s, he was, you could say, kind of slowing down on those really big world-changing discoveries. If you look at the period right before the rabies claim, like his work on chicken cholera in 1879, people often mention it now as the first attenuated vaccine. But honestly, it failed to produce a product that actually worked reliably or got widely used.
Okay.
Same with his anthrax work. Lots of experiments injecting animals, detailed lab notes, sure. But it never even resulted in him claiming he had an effective vaccine.
So he'd had these massive industrial wins, but the vaccine side wasn't quite clicking yet.
Exactly. He was incredibly accomplished, obviously, but maybe, just maybe, looking for that next big headline breakthrough.
And that breakthrough came in 1885. This seems like a real turning point.
Oh, completely. Everything changed dramatically then. He made this incredibly audacious move, didn't he?
Going from animal experiments
Straight to humans, yeah. He was literally the first person ever to put a modern hypodermic syringe, the kind with a plunger metal needle into a person.
with the idea of immunizing them, preventing disease.
Exactly, with that specific intention. When we talk about safe and effective vaccines today, I mean this moment in 1885, that's ground zero.
Yeah.
And the official story, the one everyone kind of knows, and it's right there on the Pasteur Institute website, it paints a very clear, heroic picture.
The Joseph Meister story.
That's the one. July 1885. This 9-year-old kid, Joseph Meister, son of a baker in Alsace.
Right. Village of Maisons Goutte.
You got it. Attacked by a dog, supposedly rabid, got bitten really badly, 14 deep bites, hands, legs, thighs. They even know the address, 61 Grand Rue. It's that iconic.
And the mother, Marie Angelique, she was desperate, obviously.
Totally. She hears Pasteur is doing these rabies experiments on dogs, travels all the way to Paris, and basically begs him to use this experimental stuff on her son.
Even though it hadn't been proven in humans.
Exactly. The story goes there was some hesitation, some debate among Pasteur's team, but eventually a well-known pediatrician, Jacques-Joseph Grancher, gave the okay and actually administered the injections himself.
Okay, so what exactly was this cure? What did they inject into Meister?
Right. This is where it gets pretty wild, especially by today's standards. The actual stuff injected came from rabbits.
Rabbits. Not dogs.
Well, indirectly. Pasteur's lab would get dogs they considered rabid. They'd kill them, harvest saliva, brain, spinal cord.
Okay.
Then they'd dry this material out, add it to some fluid, inject that into rabbits.
Right.
Wait a bit, then kill the rabbits, take out their brains and spinal cords, dry those again this time for like 5 to 10 days, then add that to a fluid.
And that final fluid.
That was the substance injected into dogs in experiments, other rabbits, and crucially, into Joseph Meister,
Right.
dried nerve tissue from rabbits.
Injecting dried nerve tissue from another species into a child. I mean, even for the 1880s, that sounds incredibly risky, doesn't it? Were people worried?
It was definitely radical. And yeah, the treatment wasn't just a one-off shot. Meister got 13 injections.
13.
Yeah, over about 10 or 11 days. Started in his abdomen, then moved to his flank, his thigh, as they needed fresh spots.
And the outcome?
The official story, the triumphant version, is that Meister survived, didn't get rabies, and Pasteur declared it a massive, resounding success.
And that moment became history.
Pretty much. That's marked as day one of modern vaccination by syringe. It really cemented Pasteur's image as, a father of modern immunology.
The public reaction must have been insane.
Oh, immediate and huge. Meister was bitten early July 85. Treatment started July 6th. By October 26th, Pasteur is presenting his paper, Method to Prevent Rabies After a Bite, to the French Academy of Sciences.
That's fast.
Super fast.
Okay.
Next day, summaries are in the Paris newspapers. Instant sensation. And then, because of the new transatlantic telegraph...
It goes global.
Exactly. New York Herald has it by October 30th. Harper's Weekly runs a big piece by December 19th. This wasn't just science news. It was a media phenomenon.
Totally.
And the story just kept rolling. Especially in America, there was this really dramatic follow-up. Just before that Harper's Weekly story hit, 4 boys in Newark, New Jersey get bitten by a dog, also suspected rabid. Their doctor, William O'Gorman, gets this wild idea. Let's take them to Paris.
To Pasteur.
All the way to Paris?
Yep. He launches this massive publicity campaign, drums up this whole race against time thing to save the boys.
And people bought into it.
Hook, line, and sinker. The public was totally captivated. Money just poured in. Andrew Carnegie chipped in, lots of others. It was a huge success.
So they actually went.
They did. Got to Paris January 2nd, 1886. Started treatment in Pasteur's lab the very next day.
In his lab, not a hospital.
Nope, his private lab. These were still experimental treatments. But the papers back home, daily updates. The New York Times had headlines like, "The Newark Boys in Paris."
Wow. And did it work?
Well, again, the boys survived. It was declared another success. They came back to the U.S. as heroes. Parades, public events, the whole 9 yards.
That must have generated even more buzz.
Unbelievable buzz. And all that publicity, that fundraising momentum, it led directly to funding the New York Pasteur Institute by August 1886.
So this was basically America's first huge medical fundraising drive. Pretty much, by all accounts, the first and biggest up to that point. It totally set the model for how public health philanthropy would work later on.
And back in Paris, the original Pasteur Institute must have benefited hugely, too.
Oh, absolutely. Pasteur himself proposed building a dedicated rabies clinic in March 86, instead of just using his lab.
And the money came pouring in internationally.
You bet. Over 2 million gold francs, which today, you're talking over $62 million.
Whoa, where did it come from?
All over. The Rothschilds, French philanthropists, but also foreign leaders, the Tsar of Russia, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, just massive international buy-in.
And the opening must have been quite the event.
Oh, a total spectacle. November 14th, 1888. 600 dignitaries, the French president, ceremonial guards, La Marseillaise playing.
And Pasteur himself.
Front and center. Wearing his Grand Cordon of Légion d'Honneur, giving this big speech. He wasn't just a scientist anymore, he was a French hero, an international celebrity.
And the main job of this grand new institute?
Primarily, it was a place to make and give the rabies treatment. Anyone bitten by a dog that might be rabid could go there.
Even if they weren't sure the dog had rabies.
Exactly. Remember, no test existed. Just being bitten by an enraged dog, an angry or aggressive dog, that was enough to qualify you for the full course of 13 injections.
And this model continued after Pasteur died.
Yeah, after he passed in 1895, the Institute kept going, expanding its research. They started applying his microbe theory, the idea that tiny germs cause disease.
Which he developed studying wine and silkworms.
Right, applying those ideas systematically to human diseases. And always using that revolutionary tool, the hypodermic syringe.
Okay, so that's the story we all kind of know, the heroic narrative. But you mentioned earlier there were issues, omissions. This is where it gets really interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is where the standard history starts to unravel a bit. For starters, Joseph Meister. He wasn't actually the first person Pasteur tried his rabies vaccine on.
He wasn't. But the official story starts with him.
It does, but there were at least 2 others before him. And here's the really stunning part. The details about these earlier cases, they were in Pasteur's private lab notes.
Okay.
And the Pasteur Institute didn't release those notes to researchers until the 1970s.
Wait, the 1970s? That's nearly 100 years later.
Almost a century, yeah. It fundamentally changes the timeline and the context of the Meister success.
Okay, so what do these hidden notes say? Who are these earlier patients?
Well, in May 1885, just 2 months before Meister, there was a 61-year-old man, Mr. Girard. He was bitten, very agitated, convinced he had rabies. Pasteur gave him injections.
Yeah.
Well, this was Pasteur's first ever attempt to treat suspected symptomatic rabies in any living thing. But hospital officials and the health ministry were skeptical and actually stopped the treatment partway through. So, inconclusive maybe.
Okay, who else?
That same month, May 1885, an 11-year-old girl, Julie Antoinette Pouhon, beaten by her own puppy, developed a headache. Pasteur gave her 2 injections of his material.
And what happened to her?
Tragically, her symptoms got much, much worse very suddenly. She died the next morning. The notes say she died of rabies.
Died after getting the injection?
Yes. Died the morning after the second injection. These weren't minor details. These were failed, potentially harmful prior attempts that were completely kept out of the public narrative for decades.
Wow. That puts the Meister case in a totally different light. And what about the Meister case itself? You said there was no test for rabies?
Exactly. That's another huge issue. They couldn't prove the dog that bit Meister actually had rabies. It was just described as aggressive, angry, and rage.
The dog might not have even been rabid.
Correct. And even if it was, there was absolutely no way to know if Meister himself had actually contracted the virus from the bites.
So, scientifically speaking, what did the Meister case actually prove?
Well, that's the thing. Scientifically, almost nothing.
Really? Nothing.
Think about it. You have one case. A dog that might have been rabid bites a boy who might have gotten infected, who then receives 13 injections of dried rabbit nerve tissue and doesn't die.
That's a lot of mites.
Exactly. It's a sample size of 1, riddled with uncertainty. Even in the 1880s, scientists knew that one case proves basically nothing. It's as close to zero scientific evidence as you can get. It's a powerful story, yes. Evidence, no.
Okay, and this raises another question for me. Was rabies actually this huge, terrifying epidemic everyone seemed to think it was? Or was the fear maybe out of proportion?
That's a really sharp question. Looking back at the actual numbers, it seems the fear was definitely amplified.
How so? What were the numbers like?
Well, take Paris, population about 2 million then. In a peak year for rabies deaths, 1878, there were only 24 recorded deaths.
24. In a city of 2 million.
Yep. And across all France between 1850 and 1872, the average number of human deaths attributed to rabies was only about 25 per year.
That seems incredibly low for something that caused such panic.
It does. And remember, these are deaths attributed to rabies again, with no clinical tests available at the time to confirm it.
So if it was statistically pretty rare, why the intense fear? Why this awful specter of rabies that seemed to grip everyone?
Good question. Seems like 2 main things were going on. First, rabies just made for fantastic, terrifying stories.
The power of narrative.
Exactly. Big novelists of the day, Balzac, Victor Hugo, George Sand, they all wrote about the horrors of rabies. Victor Hugo himself noted only about 15 rabid dogs were killed yearly in Paris, but the fictional accounts were way more dramatic and scary.
So literature kind of hyped it up.
Definitely amplified the fear far beyond the actual risk. And second, you had the reality of city life back then.
How so?
Crowded cities, poor sanitation, lots of free-roaming dogs, some owned, some stray. It just created this constant low-level sense of potential hazard from dogs.
Okay, that makes sense. But was there anything else? Maybe something about how rabies was diagnosed or misdiagnosed.
Now you're getting to perhaps the most shocking part, suggested by some deep historical analysis. The possibility of widespread misdiagnosis due to poisoning.
Poisoning? You mean dogs being poisoned?
Yes. Think about it. Cities were trying to control stray dog populations. Common poisons used back then, often mixed with meat scraps left out for strays, were things like arsenic and mercuric chloride.
Okay.
And what symptoms do those poisons cause in dogs? Severe gastrointestinal problems, neurological distress, angry, aggressive behavior, foaming at the mouth.
Wait, those sound exactly like the symptoms described for rabies.
Precisely. A dog suffering from arsenic poisoning would look, to almost anyone, like a classic rabid dog in rage.
So many of the dogs thought to be rabid might have actually just been poisoned.
It's a very strong possibility,
Yeah.
Which means many of the bites people were so terrified of might not have carried rabies at all.
Okay, let me try and piece this together. We have a disease, rabies, that was actually pretty rare. Its prevalence might have been hugely inflated by misdiagnosing poisoned dogs as rabid dogs.
Possible, yeah.
This fear was then amplified dramatically by scary stories in novels and newspapers.
Right, creating this massive public demand for a cure.
And then comes Pasteur, already a huge scientific celebrity, who offers a cure based on, well, essentially zero rigorous scientific evidence, a sample size of 1 with huge question marks.
And using a method injecting dried nerve tissue that seems incredibly risky and that no doctor today would even consider.
Plus, we now know he had prior, failed, even fatal attempts with humans that were kept secret for almost a century.
Correct. And it wasn't like nobody noticed at the time either. There were prominent critics.
Oh, really?
People like Dr. Charles Winslow Dulles, a U.S. Civil War surgeon. He pointed out that rabies deaths in Paris actually rose after Pasteur started his treatments. He was worried about injecting nerve tissue causing fatal encephalitis.
Well, anyone else.
Professor Anton von Frisch in Austria, Professor Giulio Amoroso in Naples, both surgeons who said they couldn't replicate Pasteur's animal results and questioned his stats. Professor Jules-Henri Peter, a top Paris clinician, publicly said Pasteur does not cure rabies, he imparts it.
He imparts it, meaning he causes it.
That's the implication. Even Pasteur's own key assistant, Pierre-Paul Émile Roux, reportedly didn't think the animal test results justified trying it on humans yet.
So, a rare disease, possibly often misdiagnosed, amplified by media, treated with a cure based on flimsy evidence, using a dangerous method, criticized by respected peers.
And yet, this whole thing becomes hailed as one of the greatest medical breakthroughs ever. The literal foundation stone for modern vaccine science and immunology. It's quite a story.
It really is. It just shows, doesn't it, how much things like public perception, the media narrative, maybe even a scientist's existing fame, can shape how a breakthrough is seen, sometimes completely overshadowing the actual science or lack thereof and the critics.
Absolutely. It's a powerful example of how a compelling story can take hold, especially when it meets a public need, even if the scientific ground is shaky.
What stands out most to you when you look back at all this? How does this history make you think about, medical stories and breakthroughs today?
For me, it's really about the gap that can exist between the heroic public narrative and the often much messier, more complex reality of science. How easily validation can become tied to fame and public opinion rather than just cold, hard data. It makes you question how we evaluate claims now, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you wonder how much we should question the stories we're told, even about things we think are settled history. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. How often do these inspiring stories of scientific heroes maybe smooth over the rough edges, ignore the doubts, the dissenters, the inconvenient facts? And what does that tell us about the difference between a popular story and the actual, often quite complicated process of scientific discovery and proving something actually works? What questions does this history raise for you about how we understand breakthroughs today? Something to think about.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.